He sits at the edge of the playground, not because isolation has claimed him, but because something quiet and intricate is unfolding within. The swings drift across his vision like distant orbits. Voices swell and sink. The world presses forward with noise and motion, yet he listens with a kind of intention that has nothing to do with preparing an answer. His silence carries an entire interior landscape, rooted in observation, familiar routines, private experiments, and those long unspoken questions that rarely find their way into conversation. People often mistake quiet for absence. They calculate presence by volume, by how quickly someone responds, by how efficiently a child can perform when summoned. But the quiet child is not hollow. They hold depth. They hold reserves. From the outside, silence can look like retreat. From the inside, it feels like cultivation. That gap between appearance and experience becomes the foundation of nearly every misunderstanding surrounding quietness. Why does a child choose silence? Sometimes it begins with temperament. Some children arrive in the world with nervous systems that lean toward gentler rhythms, finding rest in low stimulation. At other moments, silence forms as protection. In homes where speaking invited criticism or where emotion felt unwelcome, withdrawal became a way for a young mind to self-regulate. In classrooms that reward speed and constant participation, quietness is often framed as a flaw rather than a different kind of strength. Yet temperament and survival instinct still do not capture the entire picture. The quiet child embodies a paradox. Social in a thoughtful way, yet wary of the forms of interaction the world insists upon. They detect patterns while others race toward attention. They notice who gets overlooked, the tiny fractures in a moment, the shift in a teacher's expression when a student falters. Listening becomes their practiced art. They carry impressions the way others carry collections, gathering small yet significant pieces that will later shape metaphors, ideas, inventions, music, the untouched substance of creativity. Many poets and scientists began as watchers long before they became speakers. In silence, they learned to gather nuances. In silence, they tested the texture of life before stepping forward. And yet silence remains delicate. It survives inside a culture that celebrates immediacy and constant performance. The quiet child often absorbs a single difficult message. You must be louder to be valued. Some respond by masking, rehearsing extroverted patterns they observe in classrooms, families, or stories. Masking drains energy. It chills the inner world. Others retreat further, convinced that life will never adjust its pace enough to meet them where they stand. What starts as a way to stay safe becomes an ongoing negotiation between one's inner truth and the pressures that surround it. There is also a moral subtlety embedded in this tension. Quiet children are often labeled well-behaved, compliant, uncomplicated. Adults loosen their shoulders around them, assuming that ease means everything is well-tended. Yet ease is not the same as being nurtured. A child who does not ask for attention may be the one receiving the least of it. In homes and classrooms, attention is frequently distributed by volume rather than need. The child who announces their struggle gets support first. The one who speaks in a whisper waits. Those waits build up over time. They are small emotional withdrawals that, when compounded, teach a child to see their own needs as negotiable. Expecting less becomes a habit. Asking less becomes a pattern. Soon, the quiet child begins to imagine their desires as interruptions rather than signals of their humanity. This is where the psychology folds inward. Quietness becomes both sanctuary and confinement. The sanctuary is where reflection matures into insight. The confinement is where self-erasure settles in as a daily practice. The quiet child grows cautious with their own voice. They rehearse the words they hope to share, then abandon them before the moment arrives. Apology becomes a kind of shelter. "I'm sorry, I don't want to bother" becomes their preface before anything has even been said. Eventually, the apology becomes woven into identity. It is a way to move through the world under the belief that their presence burdens others. Yet, paradoxically, there is strength hidden inside that apology. When quiet people choose to speak, their words tend to carry weight. The rarity itself commands attention. Their thoughts land with the gravity of something saved and considered. But being heard is not the same as being understood. The quiet person often communicates in subtle, layered ways, using slower rhythms and gentler signals. Modern conversation rarely waits for these rhythms. It celebrates the swift retort and the clever remark. Groups can miss the thread of a slow-forming idea. The quiet child then learns to shrink their language to fit the pace around them, compressing their thoughts to avoid disrupting the tempo of the room. Rethinking this dynamic begins with reframing silence not as a flaw to correct, but as a form of presence worthy of respect. Silence represents a different type of engagement. It is not absence, it is patience. It restrains the impulse to judge. It gives complexity the room to unfold. Imagine a culture that values the deliberate thinker as much as the rapid responder. Imagine a classroom or meeting where the opening moments are intentionally left spacious, granting time for the quiet mind to shape something original. Most of our shared environments, from schools to open offices to team discussions, are built for immediacy rather than depth. The quiet child often moves through a world arranged against their natural pace. There is another layer that deserves attention: the ache of misfitting. When a quiet child absorbs the messages around them, they can become as harsh toward themselves as the world has been indifferent. They evaluate their worth against the surrounding volume and conclude they fall short. They may interpret their introspection as a flaw, believing their long silences signal some hidden fracture. As adolescence arrives and identity becomes tied to visibility, digital presence, likes, and public affirmation, the quiet teenager can feel increasingly displaced. What once felt like a rich interior territory now begins to resemble a burden. The inward self searches for permission to be recognized. It becomes an unspoken plea that asks, "You may look, but do you know how to understand what you see?" Some quiet children grow into adults who lean into their own invisibility. They work behind the scenes, choose supporting roles, and keep their aspirations restrained. Not because they lack skill or imagination, but because no one ever taught them how to occupy space without apology. Yet the opposite can also unfold. A quiet child's interior life can evolve into a different style of leadership. It is a leadership grounded in careful observation. It begins with listening before acting. It appears in the leader who notices the overlooked person in the corner and creates room for them to enter the conversation. The quiet person's ability to hold complexity becomes a powerful asset in any community willing to recognize its value. Caring for the quiet child starts with validation that does not hinge on performance. It means welcoming their slow-forming responses rather than rushing to speak over the silence. It means asking open questions that invite exploration instead of interrogation. It means offering roles that align with thoughtfulness rather than spectacle. The recorder who tracks ideas with precision. The curator who organizes projects with clarity. The observer who maps the social texture of a group. These roles do not limit their social growth. They affirm their natural way of engaging and provide roots for meaningful contribution. We also need to help the quiet child learn the art of translation, the ability to bring their inner richness into forms that others can grasp when the moment calls for it. This is not an attempt to manufacture extroversion. It is an offering of tools, gentle practices before social situations, simple ways to begin conversations, and signals that let others know they need space to think. Imagine normalizing a child saying, "I'm processing, give me 5 minutes," as part of everyday interaction. That small allowance would reshape our understanding of how thought and speech unfold. There is a philosophical insight embedded here. In a culture that often mistakes speed for intelligence, quietness serves as an essential counterbalance. It reminds us that thinking is not the same as talking and that listening does not equal absence. The quiet child becomes an invitation to slow our pace, to pay attention, to perceive what usually goes unnoticed. Their presence raises a deeper inquiry. What does it mean to be fully present without overshadowing others? How do we build communities that reward depth rather than spectacle? Still, the vulnerabilities are real. Quiet children are more easily overlooked in evaluations, skipped for leadership opportunities, and misread as disinterested. The consequences are significant. Without deliberate support, the quiet child may adopt a story of invisibility, a belief that their voice is unneeded. Once accepted, that belief can shape the architecture of an entire life. At the edge of all this lies a subtle but powerful shift waiting to unfold. What if classrooms, workplaces, and families were designed so that the quiet voice had both safety and amplification? What if the slow thinker were offered the first moment to speak precisely because they move at a different rhythm? What if our default assumption leaned toward depth instead of spectacle? These questions are not abstract. They influence real development and real futures. The child under the maple tree, the one watching the swings and listening for meanings that others overlook, can be guided toward an adulthood that honors their innate gift. They can learn to translate their thoughts, to assert with gentleness, to find companions who value conversations that unfold gradually, and to occupy space without raising their volume. A central paradox rises again. The quieter you are, the more room you create for others to fill with sound. Yet the louder the world grows, the more indispensable quietness becomes. The question is not how to amplify the quiet. The question is how to help the world listen. This requires us to rethink what we value, how we distribute attention, and how we shape the environments we share. If you recognize yourself in this quiet, remember this. Your silence is not a shortcoming. It is a flexible strength. It can serve as armor, as confinement, or as sanctuary depending on how you hold it. The way forward is not to eliminate your quiet, but to steward it, allowing it to function as both refuge and instrument, both safe harbor and meaningful voice when the moment arrives. There is a way for the quiet to teach the loud the discipline of listening, and for the loud to show the quiet how to be recognized. The connection between these two ways of moving through the world rests on practice, patience, and a willingness to rearrange the expectations we often take for granted. Let that idea stay with you. It opens the door to much more. How the quiet grow into different adult patterns, how silence threads itself through creativity and leadership, and the practical habits a quiet person can cultivate to thrive without sacrificing their authenticity. Yet beneath this potential lies a struggle that often goes unnoticed. The quiet one is frequently underestimated. Teachers pass him over for leadership roles, assuming he lacks initiative. Friends forget to include him in their plans, believing he would prefer solitude. In conversations, his ideas slip by unheard until someone else repeats them with more force, and suddenly they are worth celebrating. It produces a strange experience of invisibility, a sense of being both present and overlooked in the same moment. Even so, invisibility can carry its own kind of liberation. The quiet child can move through the world without the constant pressure to perform. He can observe without scrutiny and learn without needing to prove himself at every turn. This freedom to watch, rather than compete, becomes fertile ground for a complex inner life. Quiet children often develop deep, imaginative worlds because their attention can stretch inward without interruption. They think with nuance, feel with depth, and dream in ways that are rarely visible on the surface. Here is the paradox. The very silence that shields him can also leave him standing alone. People often misread his stillness as indifference, his shyness as aloofness, his boundaries as barriers. These misunderstandings can cut deeply, especially when he longs for connection but struggles to translate the depth inside him into something the outside world can recognize. Many quiet children grow up carrying a muted ache, hoping someone will understand them without requiring a performance or an explanation. There is also a reason so many quiet children grow into thinkers, writers, artists, and innovators. They have spent years observing without constantly inserting themselves into the moment. That distance grants clarity. They understand how people behave, when they believe no one is paying attention. They notice the weaknesses in systems that others accept as normal. They identify patterns long before they become obvious. Their influence emerges through precision rather than volume, through insight rather than spectacle. Still, the path of the quiet child carries real risks. Silence can evolve into self-erasure when it is shaped by fear rather than genuine preference. If you are told repeatedly that your voice has little value, you may begin to internalize that belief. If every attempt to speak is dismissed, you may decide speaking is not worth the effort. Slowly, the quiet child may begin to conceal not only his voice, but also meaningful parts of himself. Yet the truth remains. Quietness is not a lesser way of being. It is a different form of strength. It holds deeper observation, more deliberate choices, and a steadier kind of presence. The quiet child does not need to compete for attention to shape a room. Influence does not depend on volume. It depends on presence, on the ability to read what others overlook, on the patience to wait until the right moment arrives. Perhaps this is the quiet child's greatest offering. While others react quickly, he absorbs. While others speak to fill the air, he saves his words for when they carry weight. In a world overwhelmed by noise, the one who can sit in stillness becomes the one who sees most clearly. Because sometimes the quiet child is not simply watching the world, he is studying it. And one day, when he does choose to speak, the world will realize it should have listened long before.